For the past few days, I've been exploring the battlefields in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And if you've been following along, you had to know that at some point I would end up in the spot where I am right now. This is Seminary Ridge, and the area where I am at on July the 3rd, 1863 would forever be immortalized as the launching point for what would become known as Picketts Charge. Alright, now before we get going here, I do need to make it clear that this is not meant to be a full-on documentary about Picketts Charge. There are so many great resources and books and documentaries about this element of the battle that I honestly feel like anything that I would try and do would just fall short. So this is just kind of documenting my experience walking the battlefield and this part of the Battle of Gettysburg. But just for the sake of context, on day one of the battle, Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia delivered, I guess you could say, like a left hook to the Army of the Potomac. On day two, they come back with a right hook, and on day three, Lee is going to try and end it all with a big old haymaker right up the middle. So he concocts this plan where he's going to assemble this large force of Confederate soldiers. They're going to charge across open ground and hit the Union right in the middle. Now, Longstreet, his corps commander, was very much against this, but Lee, being the battlefield commander, his order is what wins the day. So they're going to be, it's called Picketts Charge. Technically, it's the Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble Charge. Under Pickett are going to be 3 brigades under the leadership of Armistead and Kemper and Garnett, and this is going to define the Battle of Gettysburg. One of the biggest misconceptions about Pickett's Charge is that it was only Pickett's division who participated in the attack. In reality, it should be called the Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble Charge, because all 3 divisions were involved. This is a monument to the Confederate soldiers from North Carolina. Here you can see these men struggling forward, and you have a wounded soldier who is urging them ahead. And interesting side note, this monument, which is really well done, was sculpted by Gustav Borglum, who was the man responsible for the sculpting of Mount Rushmore. And then you can see where he's pointing to off in the distance along Cemetery Ridge. Whenever you come to Gettysburg and travel along the Confederate lines along Seminary Ridge, one thing that you are going to see a lot of are cannons. I'm talking lots and lots of cannons. Well, that's because on July the 3rd at 1 o'clock, in preparation for Pickett's Charge, the Confederates opened up with the largest artillery barrage in the history of the Western Hemisphere. It just sounded like a constant roar of thunder. Even the old veterans here on Seminary Ridge were amazed at what they were seeing and hearing, and the ground just must have shook. What they were trying to do was soften up the Union lines. What they didn't know is that a lot of their shots were going over their heads. But anyway, yeah, that must have been something to behold. So at 3 o'clock, the thunderous roar of cannon on the Confederate side would have subsided, and the call would have went out to begin the charge. So just imagine along these lines right here, over 12,000 men setting out across this field, moving past the artillery and heading up to the famous little copse of trees right there a mile away on the Union line. All right, so I'm setting out now, following the path of the Confederates as they would have charged across this open ground on the afternoon of July 3rd, which would have been extremely hot. So you can just imagine what it must have been like for those guys marching across this field under Union artillery fire. It was said that in formation there would be just lines of men knocked out by Union artillery, and then they would have to close ranks and they would get knocked out again. It must have just been awful for these guys. And one thing that you might notice, like you can barely see the copse of trees ahead of me now. This is not flat ground. These are kind of rolling Pennsylvania hills. So whenever you think of Picketts Charge, whenever you read about it or see it on documentaries, don't think just flat, you know, pancake terrain that they're going across. There's going to be lots of dips and swales and ups and downs before they even get to their objective. Now, as the Confederates are continuing their advance towards the Union center, they're going to get up here to the Emmitsburg Road. And once they get to this spot, I'm going to go ahead and cross here, they're going to come up against some pretty significant problems. There's going to be fences that they have to cross. They either have to go over or they have to tear them down. And once they get up to this point right here, well, now they are within range of the Union rifles. And you can imagine just in this field right here, it was just a mob of people. There's accounts from Union soldiers of volleys of rifle fire going off, and it said it looked like Confederates were falling, like a sickle was just cutting them down. Garnett is going to be killed right here in this area somewhere. Don't know the exact details of it. His body was never identified. So he is either in an unmarked grave here or in an unmarked grave somewhere else. He's the only Confederate general who died in battle who was never identified. But right up in here, it would have just been carnage. So right from here, you can kind of get the same view that a Confederate soldier would have had on the charge up this hill. Here's the famous little copse of trees. Pickett's men had veered off to the left of it. There's been some debate on whether the copse of trees was the actual marker or not, or whether it was Ziegler's Grove up there on the top of Cemetery Hill. Either way, this is the general area where the Confederates were trying to reach, and it's right around here where the attack is going to be repulsed. So here behind me you can see the famous angle of the Union line where a stone wall takes a 90-degree turn up here and then another 90 right here. And it's somewhere in this area where General Armistead is famously going to take off his hat and put it on his sword and hold it up in the air, and he's going to lead a few Confederates over the line here that are going to breach the Union defenses, and that's going to cost him greatly. He is going to become mortally wounded right here on the battlefield. So again, this is from the Union position looking towards Seminary Ridge. There is the angle, and there's one more thing that I wanted to walk up and show while I'm here. This monument marks the farthest advance of the North Carolina troops who were under the command of Pettigrew. There's technically Henry Heath's division, but Pettigrew had taken over. Whenever you get up to this monument, it tells us a little bit of the story of these guys. It says that the North Carolina troops advanced to within 10 paces of this wall right here. And they have a quote from an artilleryman of a Rhode Island battery. And he says, "As a regiment of Pettigrew's brigade was charging and had almost reached the wall in front of us, Sergeant M.C. Olney cried out, 'Fire that gun, pull, pull.' The number 4 obeyed orders, and the gap made in that North Carolina regiment was simply terrible." Can't even imagine just the carnage that took place right here on this ground that I'm standing on. Alright, and then as we're coming up on this monument here, this is at, of course, the famous copse of trees, and here this is honoring all of the commands who participated in what they call here Longstreet's assault. So it says, "High watermark of the rebellion. This copse of trees was the landmark towards which Longstreet's assault was directed July 3rd, 1863, and then it lists the assaulting columns, and then over here it says the repulse of Longstreet's assault. It says Longstreet's assault was repulsed by like Gibbon's division, 2nd Army Corps, Doubleday's division, and it lists all of them. But yeah, this was the high water mark. So this is it. It was right here that General Meade was able to do something that no Union general up to that point had been able to do. He had outguessed Robert E. Lee. You can stand here and just imagine the scene that took place as the Confederates were retreating back towards Seminary Ridge. You would have had hundreds and hundreds of Union soldiers standing up here shouting Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg, in reference to the failed charge of the massacre that had occurred on their side in Fredericksburg in an earlier battle. But tragically for the Confederates, of the 12,000 plus men who set out across this field to attack this position, only half would return to the lines. The rest were either killed or wounded or captured right here in this area, which was devastating to the Army of Northern Virginia. There wouldn't be any more assaults. From that point on, they were headed back down to Virginia. And Lee, to his credit, didn't blame Longstreet. He didn't blame Pickett. He didn't blame the soldiers. He blamed himself. He said it's my fault. So he took ownership of the mistake and took ownership of the devastating loss that occurred right here in this place. But anyway, this is This is it. This was the spot that kind of defined the Battle of Gettysburg. One soldier who was here said that it wasn't just the high water mark for Picketts Charge, but it was the high water mark for the Confederacy. He said from this point on, the march of the rebellion was towards Appomattox. Gettysburg wouldn't be the end though. There was still going to be another 2 years of fighting and dying and sacrifice that would occur all over this country in order to keep this nation unified. But one of the defining moments, not the defining moment, one of the defining moments occurred right here on these grounds. Pretty humbling to stand in this place and think about the sacrifice that occurred here on July the 3rd, 1863.